Good evening. If you are here joining us, then it is Monday night, it is 7 p.m., and you've reached the CARES program expert speakers session. So every Monday night, our program offers a space for experts in the field of addiction and recovery to share their knowledge, their expertise, resources. And if this is the first time that you're here with us, or online or in person, we just like to define that the CARES program stands for Communities and Relatives Empowered for Support. This is a space specifically designed for the family members, for the friends, for the relatives, those people who are out there who are saying, what information is out there to help me navigate a space for a loved one in addiction? So if that's your story, then you've arrived to the right place. And we'd like to welcome our speaker tonight, Will Crosswell, who is an expert in mental health. He's a licensed clinical social worker, also a licensed chemical dependency counselor with over 15 years of personal and professional experience navigating in the space. And that's the purpose of our Monday nights, is we want to make sure that we connect with individuals who can help answer the many questions that family members have in crisis or in moments where they're looking for answers to help their loved ones. So, Will, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, really grateful to be here.
So, Will, I'll just start off by asking, there's a lot of families out there that come into this space with high emotions.
Yeah.
And it's heavy, whether it's a son or a daughter, a partner, or even a parent. And they stand in the same space where they say, I don't know why my loved one doesn't love me enough to quit whatever they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So when you run into people like this, what's your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to, you start really with the understanding that this is not a character issue. This is not, we're not dealing with a sociopath who doesn't care about people. That's not what addiction is. That's, really the person that you love and is in there. It's just been compromised by this disease that completely hijacks their decision making. And the sole objective in the brain of an addict is, I need to change the way I feel as soon as possible. And anything that's in the way, I'm bulldozing. And the whole time you're doing it, you hate yourself. That was my experience, at least, is I would cry myself to the drug dealer's house, but I'm still going, and why am I doing this again? So that brings into, this, like, there's got to be something more to this than just, why are they making these choices? This thing is making a choice for me, right? And so that's comes with this understanding of the disease model, that this is not a character issue or a willpower issue. There's a disease that's hijacked your brain, and in order to treat it, you have to get somewhere where you can have some abstinence and find recovery. And there's it's not easy to overcome, but it's curable.
Well, Will, you represent a very interesting dynamic here, because a lot of families don't get the opportunity to ask these questions to their loved one. Like, why are you using? And here you've referenced your own journey in recovery. You've talked about the hijacked brain. And so for families out there that wish they could talk to their child, their son, and try to understand a little bit about that hijacked brain, what is it that the family needs to understand when they hear that term, hijacked brain?
Yeah, well, and it comes into kind of, how do you communicate effectively with someone who's in their disease? Like, because a lot of times, I'm sure, parents or spouses go around and around and around trying to logic with this thing, right? And logic is irrelevant, right? Because the nature of this disease is we continue to use despite consequences. Logic says, okay, you've had 3 DWIs and your wife is telling you they're going to divorce you. Like, logic would tell you to stop drinking. but we don't. And so, as far as like how do you converse with someone who's, you can't get into fear tactics or this will happen. The only thing that I've seen work is hitting them in the heart as hard as possible. And that's reminding them of who they are and in relation to you too, and this is kind of comes into the intervention process a little bit of kind of structuring a conversation around reminding them of who they are, why you matter, why they matter to you, and ultimately why you matter to them, sharing a little bit about how scared and hurt you are by watching this, and then calling them to their higher self. Like, this isn't you. Like, there's two different entities that are at play. There's this disease that is just running circles around us, but like little Jimmy or whoever it is, like that person's in there too, right? And so I like to kind of help families separate those two things. If there's the disease and then there's the person that we're trying to save.
And Will, a lot of the research here that we see shows that 1 in 4 families are affected by addiction. It's very common, and we've heard a lot of speakers say that 1 in 4 is the official statistic, but we believe it's a lot higher. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about a disease of addiction, you also mentioned that it's curable. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about that aspect.
Well, maybe curable. It's in the same way that we can, cancer or diabetes is treatable, right? Mm-hmm. It's, we can put it into remission contingent on living a certain way of life, and there's a lot of pathways to sobriety, and the most effective, according to the science, is the 12 steps. The 12-step experience is, it's pretty simple. Ultimately, a lot of people complicate it. I once did, but there's a spiritual component which people get hung up on. But working the steps allows us to kind of uncover what is it about me that's so intolerable that I need to change the way I feel, the way that I do, because that's really what addiction's about. Mostly is I am crawling out of my skin if I'm me. And so I need some substance to change the chemistry of being me so I don't have to feel what I feel. And so take the substance away, an alcoholic gets worse, usually, and maybe they're not, getting thrown in jail, but like the discomfort is through the roof. And so that is the meat of what recovery is designed to treat, is the self-esteem, the inadequacy, trauma that they've experienced. 12 steps doesn't treat trauma, but it helps a little. But it's not, therapies. That's another thing that we need. But so it's really treating these kind of this hole within us that we've tried to fill with substances, and we got to find a substitute.
So part of what we do at CARES is a 3-prong approach. One is we want to provide education. Right? There's a lot of information that people say, I wish I would have heard this sooner. We also want to provide resources where people can connect, and then also community, for a space where people can reach out to someone who has a similar story. And what you've shared so far, I think, really connects with a lot of people. They're saying, yes, I lived through that experience. Mm-hmm. For the education piece, for people who may be hearing about 12 steps for the first time, how does the 12 steps, or what should a family member know about 12 steps? How would it be helpful for them directly?
Yeah. Well, so there's 12 steps for alcoholics, Alcoholics Anonymous or Cocaine Anonymous. There's lots of iterations of that, just kind of substance specific. Alcoholics Anonymous is probably the biggest. And then there's Al-Anon, which is, basically the 12-step program translated, there's different language for families. It's really the same mechanics, but the idea of it is, that there's this fellowship of people with a common problem and a common solution, and people who have come before us who have been led to this solution help those coming in the door for the first time find that solution too. I couldn't, for myself in recovery, and also I've been in Al-Anon too. My dad was an alcoholic, and so I couldn't think myself into recovery. It's just it's not a thing that you can kind of conjure up yourself. I need guidance and I need direction, and the 12 steps is just kind of an idiot's guide to a spiritual experience in essence. And so it's really simple. There's some things you can get hung up on, I think, but ultimately it's just about following direction. There's some kind of exercises and some written pieces and just a way of living life that on the other end of it, you wake up and you're like, dang, like I feel pretty good about the man I am or the woman I am or the mom or dad. Like, and so ultimately it's because we've kind of cleansed a lot of this stuff that's been making us so uncomfortable being us. And on the other side of it, we find, that we've been kind of, we say in AA, like rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence, which is just, my experience for sure. And I think family members who work the steps Al-Anon experience the same thing. And then the real moneymaker is helping others. And so once you get on the other end of that, of working the steps yourself, then you're the guy or the girl taking someone else through the work. And the sense of purpose and that gives you is just nothing can compare.
Well, and Will, your life story is an example of that. You've given back. You're in this space where both as a professional, but also with your personal story, you're giving back and connecting with a lot of people. You referenced family as well, and there's a lot of families out there that might say, well, my son needs this help or my daughter needs this help. But you've kind of really identified a dynamic that sometimes we parents have our own things to work through. When you said the word, this process can help cleanse a lot of what's going on. There are families that feel guilt and feel shame. So what do you do when you have a family member that comes in there with that kind of feeling?
Yeah, and there's a common expression in Al-Anon and just in kind of family support kind of circles of like, you didn't cause it, you can't cure it, you can't control it. Like this is, me personally, I could nitpick my family, but like I had a great family, and I ended up, being a complete degenerate drug addict. And so it's like, you could do everything right, which I'm learning as a new-ish parent that's not possible. But that this is bigger than a parenting issue for the most part. And so so just kind of taking yourself off the hook and giving yourself some grace. And it's something that I hear a lot, and I was thinking about on the way over here in the industry and the way we talk about families' role in addiction. And sometimes we kind of villainize families as like, you guys are the sick ones, and you're keeping them sick, and you're the problem. And my experience, which I'm grateful ultimately to have had with my dad struggling, was, and I was 12 years sober, so like well into this, I knew everything. I'm a therapist. I know all this stuff. But when it comes to myself, my own dad, I would wake up every morning and go to bed every night obsessing about my dad, and what do I need to do to get him on a different path, and then of course throughout the day. And so I felt that like complete fear, powerlessness, and I certainly enabled him in ways, and the motive was helping him and trying to, save him from himself, but didn't yield any results. All it did was drive me crazier and crazier. And so, I think the thing I had to realize is, I play God. We play God, I think, and as a parent and spouse or whoever of a loved one, and or kid in my case, and not knowingly, but we think we're more powerful than we are. And what comes with that is a big responsibility, because if I'm in charge, then the product's pretty bad. And so, I'm not very good at playing God. I should probably stop, because all it does is drive me crazy, and this person's still drinking. So it's like, it couldn't be any worse to just stop playing God. And what comes with that is some relief and kind of trying to be right-sized and finding what can I do? And that doesn't mean we just let go and tell them, see you later. There's things that we can still do, and like what do we have the power to do, and what do we have the power, what do we not? We kind of have to surrender to that.
And Will, that's a good place to go into, because families often will say, I'm trying to do the best that I can to prevent my family member from hurting themselves or hurting someone else, and so that control comes into this. I want to make sure everyone's safe. But like you said, it can't be God, can't be someone that controls it. The results, it's not effective. And wrapped into that is all the guilt that you were talking about. So we're going to tell families, give themselves grace. It's a hijacked brain that it's tough for them to control the urge to go into addiction. But yeah, the main question is then what can a family member do?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the $1,000,000 question is then what, right? And that's where kind of coming back to like what CARES represents or Al-Anon is if I'm trying to do this by myself and I don't have other people to bounce things off of and to support me, it's too much. It's just too much, which is ultimately what I think drives us to these places like CARES and getting support from parents. And, for me going to Al-Anon was like, I just can't do this anymore, and I need help. I need help. I have to like kind of admit defeat, and which was the beginning of a beautiful journey and still ongoing, but ultimately allowing ourselves to receive help from others and to say, I don't know, help me. And so that is by far the most impactful thing, and getting involved and connected with other parents or, family members who are going through or have gone through, and ideally people who have and have gotten on the other side of it and are willing to show you what that looks like too. But, in addition to that, I think is like, what are some kind of practical things you can do kind of in the day to day and just to change the dynamic or to do your part into trying to arrest this disease and to not enable it to not unknowingly contribute to the perpetuation of that person's disease and making it stay comfortable ultimately.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Put me on the spot.
So as a licensed clinical social worker with experience in mental health, working with families, what would those top three, if you could choose, top three go-tos, interventions that kind of help make change that a parent, a family member, a loved one could do for the one that's in addiction? Yeah,
I mean, there's a word we use a lot, enabling. Of course, we all know, I think, what that means. I'd like to think of it in a different way, a little bit like the word disabling. So what are we doing for them that they could be doing for themselves, which could mean that they fail. That's the catch, right? Is if we stop doing certain things for them, like paying bills or rent or this or that, then they're going to experience consequences. And it's like, like no one changes if things aren't bad, right? Like I'm not going to change unless I really need to change. And so if there's things in my, people in my life that are kind of propping me up and I'm kind of comfortable, then I'm unlikely to really admit that I need help, And so the first thing is kind of assessing yourself, and it's helpful to have someone else to kind of talk this through with and bounce it off of, like, what behaviors am I engaged in that could potentially be disabling this person, and then identifying those, of course, and obviously financial kind of support is a big one, right? And I don't necessarily always come out hot with you need to cut them off completely, but I think identifying what are some ways that you can kind of over time dial that back to where this person is allowed to experience consequences organically that are necessary in order for someone to get to a place where they are ready to change. So that's number one. The other thing, and again, it's easy for me to say, but and kind of how we converse with alcoholics or drug addicts, like a lot of times we kind of use shaming language and react, right? I mean, we react, we get pissed, and you're destroying this family, or this or that, and it's human, right? And I think that's part of this roller coaster we get on. We get so swept up in it, and we're so activated all the time, and we go to grips. And of course, that's great ammo for the addict to kind of continue to use and just kind of keep that dynamic going, so the status quo remains the status quo. So if we were to change, and again, usually this coincides their own, a parent or loved one's own internal change that they're experiencing through recovery of their own and therapy. They start to be able to tap into some patience and some neutrality to kind of remind that person and use different language, and like I feel statements, right? Like are kind of a really common tool that we recommend of when you do X, Y, or Z, I feel this way, and so we're not necessarily, we're pointing out some behaviors, but we're not, really excessively shaming them. And like, if that's their experience of what we say, then that's their experience. But ultimately, we're not kind of perpetuating that, but also kind of trying to remind them of, I miss when we were a happy family. Like I see us now as just constantly in conflict, and being able to just dial back that level of activation so that it's disarming. So like communication styles ultimately need work.
Okay. So in some, I mean, I've never heard this said before this way. I've often heard the term enabling, don't enable someone, but I've never heard someone describe it as the behavior you're doing is disabling them. It's keeping them from being able to do something that they could be doing for themselves. So that's a behavior that we can do. The second recommendation you made was about communication styles, of eliminating that shame base and recognizing that we do feel angry in the moment, but that there can be a shift, and that shift in tone and how we talk to a family member can make all the difference. So between behaviors and communication styles, there was something that you had mentioned when we spoke earlier, and it was about micro interventions. And I'm so curious because that's also a term I'd never heard before. So what do you mean by micro interventions?
Yeah, so it's kind of in the context of intervention itself. Like an intervention, typically you think of as a moment that we create with a team of, let's call it 6 to 10 people, and we come with a really cohesive message, and we create, the design, it's by design supposed to shock the system and to accelerate the ripping of the Band-Aid off of confronting the problem, trying to reach your loved one and to hit them in the heart with love, and to have them kind of drop the walls and just admit, like, oh, I need help. That's what an intervention is designed to do. It's a really powerful moment. Sometimes families aren't ready for that, and sometimes that may not make sense or be appropriate depending on what's going on. And so instead of that, we think, okay, well, let's just kind of start knocking some dominoes down and create some momentum towards ultimately, hopefully, someone kind of getting to a place where they're willing to get help, and we can capitalize on that. And so micro interventions, we implement some of the things we talked about, where you kind of set some boundaries and some metrics with, hey, like, we're gonna expect you to pay these bills on time, or show up to this on time, or X, Y, or Z. And if you don't, then this is what's going to happen, because we are realizing that we're actually hurting you by continuing to rescue you. And we can't live with ourselves knowing we're hurting you. And so it's not even about them; it's about the conscience and the heart of you guys as parents and spouses, right? Of, I'm actively hurting you if I don't do something different. And
I want to pause right there, because I want to highlight that that's an interesting way of framing it. I mean, oftentimes in our anger, you're hurting us. Look what you're doing to the family. All these things that people out of pain, right, they express. But you're saying that the family member takes some accountability and shares with them that I'm hurting you by doing this, and this is why I'm doing something different. How does a family member react to that?
How do you argue with that, right? Yeah. I mean, how can you say, well, how dare you not want to hurt me, And so it just completely changes the dynamic of back and forth, and it's like, hey, like, I'm sorry, like, through this process, we've been, whatever, we have been in therapy or in Al-Anon, and I'm learning that I've actually been hurting you, and so I'm so sorry, and so things are going to change because I can't do that, and so I want to give you a shot to try to do this on your own, and here are the metrics for that, and if you don't meet them, then this is just the natural consequence of we're not going to be able to financially support this, or we're not going to be able to call in work for you anymore, or this or that. And then the key is, of course, only saying what you're willing to do. So don't throw out any boundaries that you're not willing to follow through with. And if and when that time comes where you need to, it's absolutely critical that you do, because if we don't, then they'll never believe another word we say. And so again, it's so hard to do this on your own. Like, if you're trying to do this on your own and you don't have support and, frankly, accountability of people kind of coaching you and pushing you of like, hey, this is the right thing to do, and we did this, and this, if we don't have that, we're just going to talk ourselves, because it's uncomfortable and it's hard. Change is hard, And
it sounds like there's a lot of emotion too. So I mean, we could create a plan, right, and share it with someone, and then in the moment, the emotion takes over. So what advice do you have for people who are afraid that, hey, I could take the advice you're giving me right now that I'm hearing, but I just feel like it doesn't work when we all are just right there in the middle of it? I mean, what can we do to prepare ahead of time?
Yeah.
Or can you?
Well, and that's a good point, because the communication of, let's say, some of these boundaries and metrics that you're going to propose has to be done in a neutral. It can't be in reaction to something happening. So the setting has to be neutral and call a family meeting, nothing actively going on, like crisis-wise, so that at least the tone and the energy is not already contentious, you know. So I think that's really crucial, because we were trying to shift and taking a new position of being proactive instead of reactive. And so by being proactive, we're setting the stage, and it's already known what will happen if X, Y, or Z happens or doesn't happen. And so it's already talked about, right? We're not reacting and just throwing stuff to the wall and, you know, getting into arguments. We've already talked about it, remember? And so we have to follow through, because we don't want to hurt you anymore. And we realize that, like, by us helping you, we're actually keeping this disease thriving, and it's going to kill you. And so we can't contribute to that. Of course, we're your parents. I'm your wife. I'm your, you know.
And Will, I'm going to ask you what is going to sound probably like a really crazy question here, but suppose I'm in that space where I'm trying to help my loved one, and I'm trying all of this here. Is it realistic for me to expect that after this one conversation, life is going to change? And if not, then how long? How long will this journey be? How often do I have to do this in order to help my family member make change?
Yeah. That's one of the hardest parts, is like the unknown, right? And that's where the fear of, a lot of us would rather just go back to what we know, even if it doesn't work, because it's comfortable, right? And we at least kind of know the outcome of what, if we do things the way we've been doing, we're going to get more of the same. And we can kind of convince ourselves that maybe it's going to get better, or maybe it's not that bad. It's familiar, right? And so by taking a new position, implementing some of these micro interventions, or just trying to make some changes on your end, results in an uncharted territory. And so the fear, what do we do with fear is the question, right? It's like, how do I navigate fear and not let it compromise me doing what I know I need to do? And so again, the fear question is the solution to that. There's a lot of things, obviously, at least in, like, let's say recovery, we talk a lot about kind of the spiritual implication, just kind of reliance on, if I'm not God, then what is, you know? And for me, I was thinking about this yesterday, like, I still think about it, like, the thing I think the most about is my God. And like I said, when my dad was struggling, I'd wake up and go to bed thinking about my dad. Like, in a way, like, my dad's addiction was God for me, you know? And so, you know, the thing we think about the most is our God. And so anyways, you know, of course we can't think the most about God all day. We're not moving into a cave in the wilderness and just, you know, becoming monks. But at the end of the day, that resonates with me. And so I think we have to find something. And of course, you know, hopefully people should know, if they don't, that recovery is not it's come as you are, as far as beliefs, lack thereof. It doesn't matter, as long as we are willing to explore and find something, at least spiritually, that works for us, based on the fact that what we're doing now isn't working, and we're desperate enough to try to find something, you know. And so again, I think recovery helps with the fear. Having support of other parents or, you know, spouses and family members, absolutely crucial. And then some of our own life experience and our own trauma. I mean, then we're talking about therapy and this whole other idea of, a lot of times we're treating our own pain by kind of hovering and trying to fix our loved one who's addicted, you know. And so they get better and we're still suffering. Like, there's maybe some old wounds that we need to take a look at too.
And it's hard for us to be able to recognize when we have our own wounds and how that contributed to this, or, you know, how it's maybe even sustaining that. So what's your advice to a family member who is, for the very first time, looking outside of the picture, and it's no longer the focus on my loved one? Now it's, oh, there's stuff that I need to work on. So is there some recommendation to build that awareness? Is there something that families need to do to kind of find that reflection, find that insight about their own role or their own trauma or wounds?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, right, it has to come outside of us, because we don't, you know, I speak personally, I don't have my own answers, you know, and so I need either experts, therapists, clinicians, peers, Al-Anon recovery, the 12 steps of Al-Anon or whatever. Those facilitate healing of wounds and insight and awareness. And even just starting with a book, and I'll plug a book that I always recommend to all my families. It's the best book. So I'm an interventionist and was trained by Jeff and Deborah J, who created an intervention model called Love First, and that's the model I use and was trained in. And so Deborah J wrote a book called No More Letting Go. I recommend it to every family I work with, and never heard anything but rave reviews. So I'll plug that book as because sometimes it's like I'm willing to read a book. I'm not going to any of these groups. I'm not talking but I'll read a book, and if that's all, I think that's a good one to start with.
And again, there was No More
Letting Go by Deborah J.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a resource. It's very practical. It's accessible. People can find this.
$13 on Amazon, probably. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to just give us a peek into it. We promise we're making the recommendation. Buy the book.
Yeah.
This is a recommendation here. But tell us, what will people find in this resource?
Yeah, well, a lot of what we've covered, but I think just philosophically, a lot of times in addiction recovery and family recovery, we talk about letting go and letting them just figure it out. We got to detach with love and remove ourselves. And Deborah J, obviously in some cases that makes sense, but Deborah J, I think, presents no. We're going to let go, in the sense that we need to kind of separate healthily, but we're not giving up either, right? And so I think it's a little different than some other schools of thought in this family recovery piece. So I think it's kind of an interesting take on, things that we can do for ourselves and also with our loved one that keep this, the hope alive that they can get better. Because isn't that what it's all about? Obviously sometimes people don't get better, but I think the majority of the time they do. And so that's the carrot is someday they will recover and this will be all worth it, right?
So your own story is a testimony of hope. It's a testimony of how change can happen. And as we open up the space, because in about a minute, we're going to have a microphone going around the crowd here. So if you have a question, now would be the right time, whether online or in person, we'll have that space. But my question as we're getting that set up here to you, Will, is you've referenced your father, you've referenced your own recovery, and you briefly mentioned being a parent. So if I may, I'd just like to ask, what are you doing differently to help break these generational chains?
Great question. You're good. Well, my daughter will never see me drink, and the thing about recovery and getting into recovery is we realize that alcohol is not the problem to begin with. But I think culturally, growing up and how I did, we drank, family Crosswells drank, my mom's side of the family drank, and, that was just norm, right? And so at the very least, she'll grow in an environment where it's not alcohol-centric, right? And certainly not drug-centric. And so but recovery is a way of life, and it's a way for me, imperfectly, for me to strive to be the best version of myself that I can be, which means my default and alcoholics' default is selfishness and self-centeredness, which is directly clashes with being a good parent. I need to be selfless, and I need to think about her needs before mine, and I need to practice, vulnerability and saying I'm sorry if I do something, if I hurt her feelings, and being human. Those are things that I want to model to her, because those are all things that I've learned in the program. I didn't do that stuff before I entered recovery, and so I think just kind of modeling some of that for her, I hope, will really make an impact.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for everything that you're sharing, the promise of hope, a vision of a future as well, as people are navigating through this space and going through their own journey. So with that, we're going to open up the space here. So if you have a question, just want to remind you that we do have a camera that's pointing to us here. We keep it anonymous in this space. But as we open up here, we just encourage you, if you have questions, if you're referencing to a family member, we just avoid using their names out of confidentiality and respect for them. But we have a great expert here to ask questions here. So first question.
Hey, Will, thanks for being here. Do you ever run into an issue with a young adult or an adult where you kind of get them to the point where you're trying to get, maybe it's an intervention, but you just run into the situation you just can't force them to do anything because, they just don't have to or don't want to or aren't ready. And what do you do in that kind of situation when you've got somebody that just won't accept the help that you're trying to get them?
Yeah. Well, I will say that obviously happens, right? And that's why I think intervention's not always the right thing, because I think timing is important, right? So, and you can kind of intervene at a time where it's hard to support the case, even though maybe from our lens and a parent's lens, there's a problem, but maybe it's a little too soon for them. And so we intervene and we kind of do all the things that we do, and they're just not convinced. Because ultimately, I think for us as alcoholics and addicts, like, we need to experience a certain level of suffering before we're really ready to change. That's just the painful fact of this thing. And of course we can, the bottoms can always get lower and lower and lower, and it's suffering goes on and on and on, and they're still not changing. And so I think what we can do is at the very least is, how do we go on as parents or just family members and loved ones? Like, how am I going to be okay no matter what? And that's a hard question, of course. I mean, especially think about my own kid. Like, it's easy for me to sit here and kind of give you a spiel on why, yes, you could be okay, but it's like, this is your child, and I know it's just gut-wrenchingly hard. I could only imagine. And so, again, it's like a daily thing. And so, again, I think giving yourself grace, continuing to lean on the support of other people, and also, like, continuing to keep the conversation going with your loved one if you're able to. Like, we're here to help you when you're ready for help. And not to, like, that's kind of the no more letting go piece of, like, we're not, unless they, of course, block you and you just have no way to communicate, like, I want to, like, send them messages to remind them that they're loved, that I'm here and that Dad's here for you. And when you're ready for help and, we can't give you money and, that, but, like, I still love you. And I wish we could have a relationship. I miss you, like that. Those are things we want to do that plant seeds and at least, like, start to create, if I'm on the receiving end of those, it's like, maybe it's worth trying to change, if I still have people who are fighting for me, maybe I'm worth trying to change.
Just one other follow-up to that. I mean, when you work with a family that's going through this, or maybe, how do you ever ask them to take an inventory of kind of where they are as a family, and if so, kind of what are some of the things that you would suggest they ask themselves or they take inventory of before they start this journey, when you're leading the way to kind of reframe what they're doing, what kinds of things would you ask them to be considering?
Yeah. And by that, might have just a clarified question for you, but do you mean as far as kind of their engagement and behavior, like just their own kind of awareness around their own recovery?
just some examples of that, maybe.
Yeah.
What you see in your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the deal breakers are the most prominent ones, especially with young adults, let's say, right? Like, I think the trickier cases are 55 years old, alcoholic, pretty successful, like no leverage. Like they've lost maybe this or that, but, like, ultimately we're leveraging love at that point. And most of the time that's enough. The young adult, it's pretty, I don't know a whole lot of 22-year-olds that can, like, rough it, like, really, and so almost always it's like, well, he lives with us, and it's like, okay, ding, ding, right? It's like, we can't house this disease anymore. We're trying to, we have to change something there, and then financial, kind of enabling, of course, is really common. And then I think secrecy is another thing. Like, we want to keep this as families, like, and that's part of kind of the shame of, families suffering alone they want to keep it hidden. And this disease thrives in the dark, right? And so a lot of times, you know, what comes with the secrecy is that they're lying for their loved one, and they're, you know, kind of sparing the wife maybe doesn't know the whole picture, but dad knows some stuff. And so there's not this transparency, which, you know, when we do an intervention, we, on the first team call, like, we kind of have a air it all, let's get all on the same page, because almost always on those calls, someone's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And, you know, and so it's kind of the confession time to, like, let's just get it all out there. So I think secrecy and really kind of assessing, like, am I holding some stuff back that someone needs to know? Yeah.
As we cue the next question that's coming up, I just want to tag in on that one. When you have this kind of open inventory and people are laying everything out there, what's your advice to families? Because they're going to walk out of that space, right? And they're walking out with a lot of heavy in their mind. Do you set any rules? Do you tell them, you know, how to take this new information and what things will be like for the next couple of days?
Like after that first team call, I mean, most people feel relieved though, because they've been holding on to this burden, and because part of that call too is the blueprint of how we're gonna, you know, take action to try to save your loved one. And so prior to that, everyone's been really reactive and just going where the wind blows them. And now we have a plan and we have clarity and we know exactly what we're doing and what we're not doing. And we've just kind of shared a bunch of stuff and then the camaraderie and the support of the team. I mean, that's the most important part of the team, is that it's this organism that is self-regulating, that everyone on their own, you just can't have that. And so now it's like, I can call this team member to talk about that, and, you know, we get on these, you know, they support each other on the Zooms, and so almost always they leave that Zoom like, oh my God, like, why did we wait so long to do this?
It sounds like there's trust.
Yeah.
You build trust into it. So
Totally.
I'm going to come back to this about the
Okay.
Zoom calls, because I think a lot of people are starting to get very curious about what this model looks like here. But we want to open up the space for the next question. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll pass the microphone there.
I'm going to tell a story that begs the question. And I have a adult son in his 40s that's probably an end-stage alcoholic. He's now resident in his, I think, 6th rehabilitation program. And when he starts drinking, he can't control it. But I'm going to rewind the tape to December 31, 2024. And that's important because my son has advanced degrees from 2 Southern state universities, and he knows more about SEC football than Oppenheimer knew about nuclear physics. So one of the things we kind of have in common, I always keep up with the SEC football teams and his favorite teams. And so on New Year's Eve, Ole Miss upsets, I believe, the Oklahoma University. No love for that place since I'm a UT man, but I kept texting him during the game, and then I called him and I got no response. No response. And I knew something was very wrong. About 6 o'clock the next morning, after I can barely sleep all night, I go out to this apartment in the Domain, which has 300 and something units in it, and it's New Year's Day on 2025. I know his apartment number, but I don't know what the touchpad code is to get in. And I'm not a spiritual person, but something told me what number to punch, and it worked. And I went in, and he is barely breathing. There are liquor bottles and mess just everywhere. All I can do is he weighs more than I do, and he's very muscular, but you know, all I could do was turn him over to keep him from choking on his regurgitation. And I get on 911, and I get a very helpful lady who walks me through everything I need to do to keep him alive. And in the meantime, she is dialing the EMS people to come get him. And they have trouble getting into these massive apartments. Anyway, they take him to the ER at St. David's North. And then I'm going to tell you, even 4 days later, he's intubated, he has a breathing tube. I look on his chart, they're giving him fentanyl, they're giving him Ativan, they're giving him propofol, all to keep him so sedated that he doesn't become violent and tear out all of the life support that's going on to him. And then, while I'm visiting one day, the ER doctor, not the regular intensive care doctor, happened to come by while I'm there. And he wanted to check on my son. He told me that he had blood alcohol of 0.34 when they took him in. And he said that's the highest blood alcohol of any ER patient in the history of this hospital who lived. Now, I'm getting to the why does this beg the question, that every time the phone rings or a text message comes in after 10 o'clock and before 7 in the morning, a pang of fear goes down me that it's going to be that he has died or that he's about to die. And I don't know that I can bear that loss. And so what the question that's begged is, what do I do? How do I let go of something that is, if the doctors told me I had pancreatic cancer and I was going to die in 6 months, I wouldn't be real, it would be disappointing, but I'm 79 years old. So, and so how does one live with the death of an addicted child?
Will, and this brings up, and thank you for sharing, this brings up a really good point, that this is a terror that a lot of families live, that if I do set boundaries, or if I do something, what if something tragic happens to my family member, and how do you answer to that specific scenario?
Yeah, well, I hear kind of two questions too, of like, and I certainly don't want to speak on like as if I know what it's like to lose a child either. So as a therapist, and I'm trauma trained and all that stuff, and how do you kind of how do you prepare yourself, or how do you cope and process probably the worst imaginable thing that I could think of in my life, for sure, right? To lose a child. And again, I think that's where we have to rely on the expertise, in your case, of therapists with specialties to let them walk you through what that looks like. But also, what's probably more impactful is other parents who are going through that same fear, or worst case, have gone through that fear, or have gone through that experience, and letting them help you and show up for you. Because really, like, if that does happen, I think the only usefulness to it would be to use that experience to help other parents, probably, to give it meaning, right? I would think. And so that's probably what that comes down to. Yeah. I think there was another question there, but
No, I think that was powerful right there. I mean, I want to emphasize the genesis of this program, the CARES program, is to build an environment where there is support. Mm-hmm. Tonight, Will, you gave us education. You walked through the hijacked brain. You walked us through all the key points that we as family members need to understand about our loved ones going through addiction. You gave us resources. You gave us a book recommendation. You talked about different interventions, including 12-step programs that exist, but also the last key point, which is community and the need to be able to connect with other individuals, not just experts in addiction, but also the community that has lived that. And that is what the space is. And I want to remind people here in the crowd, but also online, that if there's anything that you've gone through tonight or that you've heard that resonates with you, and you need to connect with someone, that this is our purpose. We want to make sure that we do connect you with the right resource and the community there. So I want to put that out there. And also, if I may, Will, the month of May is designated as Mental Health Awareness Month. And we all know that every month and every day is something that we should be aware of mental health issues, but more so in months like this where we bring awareness to things like this. And there's a lot of crises that can come up, even stories like what was shared here. Is there a go-to resource that you provide to families when there's an active crisis or something 2 a.m? Who should they call? Where should they dial?
Yeah, well, part of my line of work is like, I'm kind of a crisis case manager, so a lot of times I'm that first call. But if I'm, not working with a family or for whatever reason not available, I think it was something we talked about of like wellness checks, and it's a scary thing to think about doing because you're calling the 911 and the cops are going to go over and bang on his door, and it's just something we talk ourselves out of, and I'm pretty liberal with that suggestion of the worst thing that could happen is that they're pissed a little bit that you called the mental health deputies, and if that's the worst thing that comes from that, I'm fine with that, and so I use that resource. And so when you do that, so when you call 911, they ask, emergency, fire, mental health. Obviously, you ask for mental health, and you try, some deputies are better than others, and you try to just really kind of give them an accurate lay of the land and implore them to send someone who's trained to intervene and to talk with people suffering from mental health issues and addiction issues. And so anyways, that's something I recommend when it's a scary situation like what you were going through too,
So, and I've heard 911, I've heard 988 as well as a crisis line to direct. So there's a couple resources that are quick, easy, simple that people can reach out to, and then a community to come back to connect with. Will, you've given us a lot of information, but for those who are here in person, those online as well, who want to look you up,
Sure.
and want to know more about your approach, where would they go to?
Yeah, so my business is Crosswell Interventions. CrosswellInterventions.com is everything about me when I do interventions and case management, which is kind of a concierge, parent coaching and recovery coaching and mental health coaching, and I help families and their loved ones navigate the various stages of wherever they are in this recovery process, whether it be pre-treatment or post-treatment, and everywhere in between. So. So yeah, that's where you can find me. Well,
you've painted a picture that your organization is one that is prepared for the heavy questions, and is having a space available for families that want to walk into that space. And so we are privileged to have you here. We're very grateful for everything you've shared. Want to remind people, again, and I keep referencing it, those here in person and those out there, gratitude to Cornerstone ATX that has been very great about opening their doors here. We are in Lakeway. Our goal is to have this space open on Mondays, and what you've witnessed tonight is actually the last of our 3rd season of speakers. And so we'll be taking a brief pause during the summer, but coming back in the fall to continue this. But that doesn't mean that we're too far away. So if you do have questions, just know that we are on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube. We're on many of the social media platforms, including LinkedIn there. So like us, subscribe. And again, although this is the last speaker for the 3rd season, that does mean that you have 3 seasons of experts to watch. You'll find stories of parents who will talk about their children. You'll even find a story of a parent and their son talking together about their experience in terms of recovery. So many stories out there. We encourage you to explore that. It's literally an encyclopedia at your fingertips online on our website, which is carescommunity.us. And again, that's carescommunity.us. And if this was helpful to you, share it with a friend, forward it over. So again, Will, we just want to thank you again for coming out here tonight. And if you do make it out here in person, just know that when we cut the cameras, our guest speaker is still here. So you do get to shake hands and get to check in. So we thank you for coming in. And if it is your first time coming out here tonight, one of the phrases we like to always end our program with is just one simple message to you. Welcome home. Thank you for coming out. We look forward to seeing you in the fall. And if you have questions, also have an opportunity to chat through the summer. Take care.